like to welcome everybody to another edition of the Major Music Lounge podcast. It's your boy D Dot coming at y'all with another episode of the podcast. If you're new to my channel, like to talk things all music production. With that being said, things like new expansions from Akai and Native Instruments, also new sound packs I may come across on Loop Masters, and just different VSTs that may come out, sales, iOS music production, as we're about to get into now. And with that also being said, also the Major Music Lounge podcast, which I interview music producers and I talk about topics as we're going to get into today. But not just music producers. If you're a sound designer, audio engineer, music production app developer, you just like having conversations about making beats, I would definitely want to interview you. And artists, y'all welcome to. I've had artists on my show in the past come on to talk about maybe their recent releases and how they're working with producers to craft their sound. So if you're an artist as well, definitely would like to have you on the show. You can reach out to me on Instagram at d._major_music or on Twitter at d.mme. I'm looking to fill slots for upcoming shows, so definitely hit your boy up. Let me know you want to be on the show. All right, so talking about iOS music production, and I wanted to do this episode. So sometimes I get these questions from up and coming beat makers and producers, or maybe people that want to get into the craft for the very first time, and they don't know necessarily which direction to go. Do I go iPad music production? Do I go with music production on a Mac? Or do I even buy a PC? Now, I can't answer those questions. Only you can answer those questions because there's a lot of variables involved with each, like cost, like how much space you have to work with, and things along those lines. So, my journey with iOS music production kind of started around 2015. Overall, I've been making beats since about 2006. I started off on a Mac platform. Actually, if you really want to get more specific about it, I started off with a old program back around 2000 2001ish. I remember me and some of my old friends, they used to come down to my apartment, and I had this program called Magic's Music Making Studio. Some of you who listen to the podcast regularly may have heard me speak on this in the past. But with Magic's Music Studio, that was basically a loop based program which you just drag loops, kind of like some people may do now, but it was like you drag loops and you just continue to build your song that way. And I think at maximum you might have had 8 tracks total. So with 8 tracks, that's all you had to work with. I actually don't have any beats to show from that experience, so I'm glad I didn't. I listened to some of my early beats and I'm just kind of like, what was I doing back then? But here we are in 2022. But to start with 2015. So in 2015, I went to a iStandard beat camp, which is held here in Dallas. And there were some people from Machine Masters down there that at the time, they were on the iPad. At first, I saw a crowd huddled around this guy with an iPad. And, at first I thought they were just listening to music. I looked a little bit further and I saw this guy had made a beat on his iPad. And I was just blown away. And at the time, that was Beatmaker 2. So around 2015, I actually had an iPad mini. That was my first experience with iPad. It was the first generation iPad mini. It had only about 32 gigs, I want to say. Around that time, I was kind of curious about iOS production because I'm a big Native Instruments user. And iMachine was kind of like another app that I started off making beats with on the iPad. And then another app was GarageBand, which has been free for a very long time. It still is free in 2022, but if you've owned any type of like iPhone, iPad, or Mac in the last probably 15 years or so, maybe even longer, you probably had GarageBand on there. And a lot of people like to use GarageBand and then move on to maybe like a Logic Pro. So, kind of going back to the story at hand, when I saw what could be done on the iPad in terms of music production, then I felt like I had to be a part of it. One, there have been times where out here in Dallas, where I currently live, I've had to take transit. Not so much recently, but in the past I've had to. And all I had at that point in time was my iPhone. And yes, you can make beats on your iPhone as well if you don't have an iPad. But what I saw being used at the iStandard Beat Camp was Beatmaker 2. And at the time, it had its own internal sounds, and it also had the ability to use what we call IAA, or inter-app audio apps, which are kind of like synthesizer apps to kind of add more sounds to your library, just like you can use an AUV plugin, which is kind of like the current format. They still have IAA apps out now, but a lot more apps are going to be in the AUV3 format now, which is Audio Unit version 3. So during my 2017 release, I did a beat on one of my songs, and I actually shot a video to that song, by the way, but it's called Motion Picture. And from there, I realized that I had a very powerful tool, and it led to, of course, more and more beats being made on iPad. From Beatmaker 2, then came Beatmaker 3, actually in the same year. I think because I did the album in July of 2017. I think maybe like 3 or 4 months after that, then came out Beatmaker 3. And Beatmaker 3 itself was very groundbreaking because it improved upon some of the things that were in Beatmaker 2. Like Beatmaker 2 had everything in terms of the sequencer looked just like what you would see, for example, on a Mac or on a PC if you're recording or making beats on there. And what I also liked was the introduction of AUV audio unit apps, which allowed you to record inside of Beatmaker 3 or Cubase's or GarageBand even in MIDI format, as to where IAA inter-app audio synths allowed you to record in audio into like either Beatmaker 2 or GarageBand or whatever app it is that you're using. So I started to then also come across a lot of other people, some people that actually have been on this show. Shout out to Beatmakers, the squad. Shout out to Miss Ladd. Shout out to a lot of the other iPad beatmakers and producers out there. But it's a growing platform now. And with that kind of being said, going back to the beginning of the video, I can't definitively give you one over the other, as using a MacBook or a desktop, for example. And on the iPad, I'm recording this in Cubases. So I say that to say, when you're talking about overall cost in terms of should I go with a Mac, should I go with a PC, should I go with a iPad? In terms of cost, now I will say that no matter which iPad you go with, you'll be able to use it for music production. Me personally, I currently use the iPad Pro. I've always used the iPad Pro. After the Mini, I've had pretty much 3 versions of the Pro. I currently have the one with the M1, which also is in the Mac that you see behind me. So personally, the most I've ever paid for a app on the iPad is about 50 bucks. That's going to be Cubases as well as Core Gadget. Now sometimes you may actually find those both on sale. Beatmaker 3 runs at about $24.99. And then I said GarageBand is free. There are also other apps on there like FL Studio. There is also another good app that I actually need to start using more of is Nano Studio. A lot of people like that one. For all my people also that like sampling, Koala Sampler is another great app. A lot of people compare that to a PO33 or even like an SP404, for example. I haven't used the SP404. And then, your average keyboard, you see that Arturia Mini Lab right behind me. That one I paid about $99. You're going to find a lot of 25 key MIDI keyboards around that 99 to maybe about 150 price range. Maybe a little more, give or take. So it really kind of depends on what you're looking for. I like the Arturia Mini Lab because to me it's sturdy. It doesn't feel like it's built cheap. I've owned several other MIDI controllers from a couple of other companies I won't put out there, but I will say out of my different experiences, I think the Arturia Mini Lab is going to be one of my personal favorites. And I've also used the Seaboard Block by Rolly. That one is probably one of the better Bluetooth MIDI controllers that I've used on the iPad. I don't know if you can find it anymore because they've kind of revamped the whole Seaboard line. In fact, today I just got an email saying they came out with a new Seaboard. I think that's 49 keys, could be more, but I'm going to check that out as well at some point. You will still need studio monitors, of course, if you're looking to get into like that home studio setup. Now, studio monitors, they can vary. Currently, I personally use the iLoud Micros from IK Multimedia. At the time, those ran me $299. Now, that particular model, they don't sell anymore. They actually came out with a newer model of the iLoud Micro monitors. Check their website, though. I have liked these a lot since I've been having them. I've been having them for about maybe like 3 years or so. One of the things I like about the iLoud Micro Studio monitors is that they're also Bluetooth, and the fact that they don't take up a lot of space. I did move from one place to my current location. Before that, I've actually had like the KRK Rocket 5s. I don't use those anymore. Those were good. I'm not saying they weren't. I like the iLoud Micros. I feel like they give you that flat frequency response as well. And I won't go deep into the Mac programs that I use to make beats in. I'll make a separate video for that. I just wanted to make this one to speak on my experience using iPad for music production. Now, just like a MacBook Pro, you can take it around with you. I guess it'll be a little bit more portable. Now, the only one thing you also got to consider is you're going to have one port on pretty much whatever iPad you get, as to where, depending on what MacBook Pro you have. Now, I have the 2020 M1 model of the MacBook Pro, which only had two Thunderbolt 3 ports, as to where if you might have purchased one of the more recent models, you probably got 3 ports, or if you have maybe even an older model of the MacBook Pro, I know some of those got even up to 4 ports. So it just kind of really depends on what model you have. But I will say, if you get the iPad Pro, which has the Thunderbolt 3 out, you can get a USB-C hub and create more ports with that. Secondly, a lot of people like the feel of being able to move sliders and knobs on the iPad opposed to using a mouse. It kind of gives you a little bit more of a realistic feel in some ways. And then going back to the whole topic of cost, in addition to like the DAW apps themselves, the audio unit apps, they can also run anywhere from being free to like, I've seen those as much as like $20. So you can build your whole sound library pretty much that way as well from a lot of synth apps. In addition, depending on whatever application you're using, like I mentioned iMachine earlier, iMachine actually has a lot of in-app purchases, which will be some of the light versions of their desktop counterparts. So while it's not the entire pack, it's still pretty good in a lot of ways. I've made some beats in iMachine. Beatmaker 3 is my personal favorite as far as music production on the iPad. You may hear some people that say Cubase's. For Beatmaker 3, now when it came out in 2017, to me at that point in time, it was the only app on iPad that was closest to being what some of these apps, it kind of in fact reminded me almost of Logic Pro, how you would make beats in Logic Pro. I know GarageBand is kind of like that in a way as well, but I will say that, you know, the sampler in Beatmaker 3 kind of reminded me also of like an MPC sampler. It's just real easy to load your samples, chop them up, and get going with making a beat. And then being able to export just the whole workflow, it reminded me of, again, Logic Pro, you know, as far as just the workflow that I like to use in Logic. Very similar in a way. The only thing in Beatmaker 3 is you can't record vocals. You have to do that as I'm doing right now on Cubase's. I don't want to make this a long, drawn-out video as far as iOS music production. I will say, you know, if you're going to go the iPad route, just make sure that you're getting something that has a lot of storage space in it, because once you start getting samples, importing your own samples, then you may even start to use it. Like I use my iPad for not only music production, but I edit videos on there as well. So I use a Fire 12. My MacBook Pro is going to be a terabyte. I don't necessarily use my iPad to the degree I use my MacBook Pro, so that's kind of why you see the difference in terms of space. But I use it enough to need at least 512. Now, some of you that may be starting out, you may just need 128 or 256. I've been down that road before. Nothing wrong with going there. At the end of the day, if you need more space, you could probably get more iCloud space, or you could probably get an external hard drive. But I will say, if you do have an iPhone, some of these apps are available on iPhones. I'm actually recording this video again in Cubase's. So in Cubase's, not only can you record vocals, but you can make beats. GarageBand is going to also be free on the iPhone as well as the iPad. Nano Studio is going to be iPhone and iPad as well. Nano Studio 2 to be exact. Those are just 3 apps on the top of my head that I could recommend that you check out. Now, GarageBand is going to be free, but those other 2 will come with a cost. It's going to be for Cubase's, it's going to be $49. For Nano Studio, I apologize. I think Nano Studio is $14.99 or so. It might be even a little less. I think I bought it on the sale maybe 2 years ago. And then Beatmaker 3 is going to be $24.99. Now that one is going to be iPad only. They don't have an iPhone version of Beatmaker 3. So if you're looking for it on iPhone, you're probably not going to find it unless between the time I'm saying this and I release this video, they happen to come out with it. I hope you found this episode of the Major Music Lounge podcast useful. If you did, go ahead, hit the like button, subscribe to Major Music TV. Like to put out new podcasts on a weekly basis. I have a lot of things coming up in the upcoming weeks, so stay tuned for that. You can also follow me on Instagram at d._majormusic. Follow me on Twitter at d.mme. And if you are a music producer, music production, content creator, sound designer, music production app developer, even an artist, hit me up on one of my social platforms. Let me know you're interested in being on the Major Music Lounge podcast, and I'll definitely look to make that happen. Until next time, it's your boy D. And I'm out.